Professional actors, you go in and just jump in and do it, best of your ability.
Let me say, can I say one thing?
please.
To me, Stanley, the great Stanley Kubrick, was an actor's enemy. And I can point to movies that he's done, the worst performances.
In Hollywood, rivalries are as common as red carpets. But few have ever burned as long or as bitterly as the one between Robert Duvall and Marlon Brando. These two men, both acting legends, once shared the same screen, the same director, and the same dream: to create something immortal. And they did. The Godfather became one of the greatest films ever made. But behind the camera, what unfolded was not brotherhood. It was a cold war of ego, envy, and pure hatred. Robert Duvall, known for his discipline and sharp intensity, believed deeply in the craft of acting. Every word rehearsed, every emotion studied. Marlon Brando, on the other hand, was chaos incarnate, a genius who broke every rule, rewrote every line, and often showed up late just because he could. Their worlds were destined to collide, and when they did, sparks flew. During filming, Duvall reportedly couldn't stand Brando's arrogance, the mumbling, the improvising, the unpredictability. Brando thought Duvall was uptight, too technical, too serious. The tension grew so thick that even director Francis Ford Coppola had to step in to keep peace on set. But it didn't work. Decades later, when both men were old and reflective, Duvall still couldn't let it go. He once said, "Brando was lazy. He could have been the best actor in the world, but he wasted it." Strong words from a man who rarely speaks ill of anyone. So what really happened between these two Hollywood titans? Why did Robert Duvall's hatred for Marlon Brando last a lifetime? And what shocking truth finally came out years after Brando's death? Let's uncover the story behind one of Hollywood's most explosive rivalries. The story begins in 1971, when director Francis Ford Coppola assembled what would become one of the most legendary casts in Hollywood history. The Godfather wasn't just a film, it was a cultural event, and for the actors involved, it was a chance to carve their names into cinematic immortality. Robert Duvall, already respected for his stage work and breakout role in To Kill a Mockingbird, was cast as Tom Hagen, the loyal consigliere to the Corleone family. Meanwhile, the towering figure of Marlon Brando was brought in to play Don Vito Corleone, a role that would forever define him. At first, Duvall was thrilled. He had admired Brando for years. After all, Brando had changed acting forever with A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront. But when production began, admiration quickly turned to frustration. Brando's working style was unlike anything Duvall had ever experienced. Unpredictable, erratic, and often infuriating. Duvall came to set prepared, knowing every line, every beat, every emotional cue. Brando, on the other hand, didn't bother memorizing his dialogue. He famously used cue cards, hidden all around the set, on walls, behind lamps, even taped to other actors' chests. For Brando, spontaneity was genius. For Duvall, it was disrespect. From the start, there was tension. Duvall believed in discipline. Brando believed in chaos. One day, during the filming of a crucial family meeting scene, Brando deliberately changed his lines mid-take, throwing Duvall off completely. Duvall kept his composure, but later stormed off set, muttering that Brando wasn't playing fair. Crew members described the atmosphere as electric but dangerous. Brando commanded attention wherever he went. He was the star, and he knew it. Duvall, despite his immense talent, felt overshadowed. It wasn't just about screen time. It was about respect. When The Godfather premiered, Brando received worldwide acclaim and won the Oscar for Best Actor. Duvall, though nominated for his supporting role, went home empty-handed. Behind the scenes, he made no effort to hide his feelings. Brando was brilliant, he admitted once, but he was lazy. He could have been so much greater if he'd cared. It wasn't only Brando's acting that irritated Duvall, it was his attitude toward others. Brando often mocked his co-stars, refusing to take things seriously, sometimes even sabotaging takes for fun. He viewed filmmaking as a playground. Duvall treated it like sacred work. Their approaches clashed like oil and water. But perhaps the real breaking point came during The Godfather Part 2. 2. Brando, unhappy with how Paramount treated him, refused to return as Don Corleone for the film's flashback scenes. Duvall saw that as betrayal, to the project, to the story, and to the people who had worked so hard beside him. He walked away, Duvall said years later, because it was easy for him. The rest of us stayed and gave everything we had. Even decades later, Duvall's tone toward Brando never softened. In interviews, while other actors spoke about Brando with reverence, Duvall often delivered sharp, unsparing truths. He had the gift, Duvall said, but he wasted it. He didn't push himself, he just coasted on being Marlon Brando. Still, deep beneath the resentment was a quiet acknowledgement. Duvall knew Brando's brilliance. He had seen it firsthand, and maybe that was what stung the most. Watching a man capable of greatness treat it so carelessly. By the time The Godfather became a cinematic legend, the relationship between Robert Duvall and Marlon Brando was fractured beyond repair. There was no friendship, no shared respect, only a memory of what could have been if ego hadn't gotten in the way. But this wasn't the end. Years later, Duvall would reveal details about Brando's behavior that no one had ever dared to discuss, and those revelations would finally explain why his hatred ran so deep by the time The Godfather had cemented itself as one of the greatest films ever made. The tension between Robert Duvall and Marlon Brando had already become part of Hollywood legend. While the public saw two extraordinary performances that brought the Corleone family to life, what they didn't see was the storm brewing behind the scenes. A storm fueled by artistic pride, ego, and two entirely different philosophies of acting. Robert Duvall came from a disciplined, methodical school of performance. Trained under the legendary Sanford Meisner, he believed acting required preparation, precision, and deep emotional honesty. Duvall studied his scripts like a soldier studies a mission. Every scene planned, every movement purposeful. Marlon Brando, however, was the unpredictable opposite. He was instinctual, impulsive, and ruled by his emotions. If he didn't feel the scene, he'd simply change it, regardless of what the script or director said. To Duvall, this wasn't genius. It was chaos disguised as brilliance. Brando made acting seem easy, Duvall once said. But the truth is, he was just lazy. He'd show up late, mumble his lines, and people would call it art. The difference in their approaches became especially apparent during The Godfather's most iconic scenes. When Brando appeared with a cat in his lap in the opening scene, a detail he improvised, it drove Duvall mad. Duvall thought it distracted from the dialogue, but Coppola loved it. Brando's unpredictability often earned him praise that Duvall believed should have gone to the rest of the cast, who were carrying the weight of his improvisations, and yet, despite his frustration, Duvall couldn't deny that Brando had something rare, a magnetic presence that pulled every camera toward him. It was a gift, yes, but one Brando didn't seem to value. To Duvall, who treated every project as sacred, that was unforgivable. Then came Apocalypse Now in 1979, another Francis Ford Coppola masterpiece and another source of tension. While Duvall delivered one of the most unforgettable performances of his career as Lieutenant Kilgore, Brando's involvement became a nightmare. He showed up to set overweight, unprepared, and without reading the script. Coppola had to rewrite entire portions of the film just to accommodate him. Duvall watched from afar as the same pattern repeated. Brando showing up late, rewriting dialogue, and clashing with Coppola. He didn't care, Duvall said years later. He had all the talent in the world, but no respect for the craft. That's why I couldn't stand him. But there was more beneath that anger. A deep disappointment. Duvall had spent decades perfecting his technique, building a career on dedication and control, while Brando seemed to stumble into greatness with little effort. It was the difference between a man who earned his legacy and one who seemed to waste it. Their feud wasn't just personal. It symbolized a divide that existed in Hollywood itself. Between the disciplined craftsman and the untamed genius, Duvall represented the old-school actor who believed in rehearsal and respect. Brando represented rebellion, freedom, and unpredictability. To Duvall, it wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a war over what acting was supposed to mean. Years later, when Brando's health declined and he became increasingly reclusive, Duvall was asked in an interview whether he ever made peace with him. Duvall's answer was short, but cutting. You can't make peace with someone who never cared in the first place. Even after Brando's death in 2004, Duvall's opinions didn't soften. He admired Brando's early work, but never forgave what he considered a lifetime of wasted talent. In a sense, Duvall's hatred wasn't born from rivalry. It was born from disappointment. He didn't hate Marlon Brando because Brando was bad. He hated him because he was brilliant and refused to honor that gift. And while Brando would go down as a myth, Duvall would go down as a man, disciplined, grounded, and painfully aware that he had once stood beside the greatest actor of all time and watched him throw it all away. When the Godfather series brought Robert Duvall to international fame, it also set the stage for one of the most complex relationships in Hollywood history. On screen, Duvall's quiet intensity perfectly balanced the chaotic energy of his co-stars, especially Al Pacino and Marlon Brando. But behind the cameras, his patience often ran thin, especially when he felt that his craft was being overshadowed by theatrics or ego-driven performances. One of the most infamous feuds reportedly developed during the filming of Apocalypse Now, 1979. The movie, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, brought together a mix of brilliant but volatile actors. And that's where things between Duvall and some of his co-stars began to sour. While Duvall approached acting with discipline and subtlety, others took a more flamboyant approach. He believed that true acting didn't need to scream. It needed to breathe. And when someone stole focus with overacting, he took it as a personal insult to the profession. Crew members often recalled moments when Duvall would quietly leave the set during heated discussions. Though he rarely lost his temper, his silence carried more weight than words. One assistant director even claimed, "You didn't want to be on the wrong side of Duvall's glare. He could cut you down without ever saying a word." The tension reached a breaking point when a particular actor, known for improvising beyond the script, pushed Duvall too far. During one intense scene, Duvall reportedly muttered under his breath, "This isn't theater school. We're professionals." The remark spread quickly among the crew, cementing the idea that Duvall held a quiet but deep disdain for actors who treated film like a playground rather than an art form. Years later, Duvall would reflect on this time, saying, "Acting isn't about who yells the loudest. It's about truth, and too many people mistake noise for honesty." That single statement revealed the essence of his frustration, not just toward one co-star, but toward a generation of performers he saw as style over substance. There were even rumors that Duvall's fallout with a certain legendary actor stemmed from a power struggle. While others sought fame and headlines, Duvall wanted authenticity. He didn't need the spotlight. He wanted respect. But when that respect was undermined, his resentment grew deeper. Insiders whispered that one particular co-star, whose ego was larger than life, became the target of Duvall's lifelong disdain. Their conflict continued off-screen. Awards season brought tension, interviews became minefields, and Duvall's honesty didn't help. He once said during a press junket, "There are actors who act for the camera, and there are actors who act for the truth. I know which one I am." Though he didn't name anyone, those who knew the story understood exactly who he was referring to. Despite all the friction, Duvall never denied the artistic brilliance of his rivals. What he couldn't forgive was arrogance, the sense that stardom excused bad behavior or disrespect for the craft. To him, every scene was sacred, and every role deserved humility. That's what made him different, and sometimes difficult. By the 1990s, many of his relationships in Hollywood had fractured beyond repair. Yet Duvall never expressed regret. He stood by his beliefs, even when they isolated him. He once said, "You can be liked, or you can be real. I chose to be real." That philosophy defined his entire career, and every feud he carried. In a world where actors often bowed to the system, Robert Duvall stood firm. But that pride came with a price. As Hollywood changed around him, so did its tolerance for uncompromising men. Still, one question remained. Who was the man Duvall truly hated more than anyone else? The one who pushed him to the edge? The answer, as it turns out, would shock even his closest friends. For years, Robert Duvall refused to reveal the full truth behind his most intense Hollywood feud. While he'd worked with some of the greatest names in cinema, one particular actor seemed to ignite something in him that went beyond simple professional rivalry. That man was none other than Marlon Brando, the legendary star whose method acting changed film forever, and whose unpredictable behavior drove Duvall to the brink of hatred. Their collaboration in The Godfather, 1972, became cinematic history. Brando, as Don Vito Corleone, commanded every frame, while Duvall's calm, controlled performance as Tom Hagen was the film's quiet heart. On screen, they were a perfect balance of chaos and composure. But off-screen, their relationship was anything but peaceful. It started subtly, Duvall's frustration with Brando's constant lateness and improvisation. Brando would rewrite lines, skip rehearsals, and often leave directors and co-stars waiting for hours. Duvall, who prided himself on professionalism, saw this as pure disrespect. Brando was a genius, Duvall once said, but even geniuses can be lazy. The tension between them only grew when Brando began to receive the lion's share of the credit for The Godfather's success. Duvall believed that every actor contributed to the magic of that film. Pacino's intensity, Caan's energy, and his own quiet depth. But the press focused solely on Brando, calling him the soul of the movie. To Duvall, it wasn't jealousy, it was injustice. Their feud reached its boiling point during negotiations for The Godfather Part 2. 2-2. When producers offered Brando an enormous salary and Duvall significantly less, he was furious. "If they don't pay me what I'm worth," he famously said, "I'm not doing it." He ultimately turned down the film, a decision that would haunt him for years. Brando's shadow loomed over the entire production, and Duvall's absence was deeply felt. Yet, for him, it was a matter of pride. Even decades later, Duvall didn't soften his opinion. He admired Brando's early work, but despised what he called Brando's careless arrogance. In interviews, he'd describe Brando as lazy, spoiled, and a man who could have been even greater if he cared half as much as he pretended to. Those weren't the words of a bitter man, they were the words of someone deeply disappointed in what could have been. Behind that anger, however, was a strange kind of respect. Duvall understood Brando's brilliance but could never accept his self-destruction. While Brando retreated into eccentricity and excess, Duvall continued working tirelessly, building one of the most consistent and respected careers in Hollywood. Where Brando became an icon of wasted potential, Duvall became the embodiment of discipline and longevity. When Brando passed away in 2004, reporters asked Duvall for a comment. His response was short and telling. He was one of the best, but we didn't always see eye to eye. Those who knew Duvall said that was his version of forgiveness. Quiet, restrained but meaningful. In the years since, the feud between Duvall and Brando has become legend, not because of public explosions or tabloid drama, but because it reflected something deeper about art itself. Two men who represented opposite philosophies, one ruled by emotion, the other by control. One chaotic, one disciplined. Both brilliant, but destined to clash. Even late in life, Duvall admitted that his anger toward Brando came from disappointment, not hatred. "I wanted to respect him," he once said, "but he made it hard." Those words encapsulated everything about their relationship. A mixture of admiration, frustration, and wounded pride. Today, their names are forever linked in cinematic history. Without Brando's power, The Godfather wouldn't have been the same. Without Duvall's restraint, it might have fallen apart. Together, they created something timeless, even if it left scars behind. And though Robert Duvall may have hated Marlon Brando in his own way, that hatred was rooted in love for the craft. For a standard of excellence, he refused to compromise. It wasn't just about ego. It was about legacy.